Okay, so this is a key to topic 22, Radicals Worksheet Extra 14. And so basically you'll be multiplying radicals. So, and these involve variables. So let's look at number one. So number one, we have the square root of x times the square root of x minus 3 square root of 5. And so notice I have this binomial times this monomial. Um, so we have, so we can use the idea uh, of the distributive property. So if I distribute, I'm going to get, now remember the square root of x times the square root of x is the square root of x squared, right? And we all know that that's just x. So this times this is x. And then I'm going to go ahead and rewrite what I see here. So it'll be minus 3 square root of 5 times the square root of x. See, that's this. But remember, we know by the product property for radicals that if the indices are the same, I can multiply the radicands. So this becomes x minus 3 square root of 5x. And that's all you can do. Those are not like terms. So you cannot combine them. All right, so that's number one. Number two, I have the square root of 5 plus x times the square root of 5 minus x. And so I have two factors with two terms in it. And so I'm going to go ahead and use the FOIL method. So I know that when I multiply the square root of 5 times the square root of 5, we all know that's 5 because that's the square root of 25. So I get 5. The outer, a positive times a negative is a negative. The outer becomes, I'm going to put the variable x and put the radical in the end. So know that this, when you multiply these two together, remember this, you're saying square root of 5 times x. So I'm going to put x in front. So it'll be x square root of 5. Okay? The inner is the same thing, x squared of 5, except this one's negative. So plus x squared of 5. And the last, a positive times a negative is a negative. See the last here? Positive times a negative is a negative, and x times x is x squared. I want you to notice, though, that these terms here are like terms, because you have x squared of 5 and x squared of 5. That's a negative one, that's a positive one, so when you add them up, that's 0. And so all you have then is 5 minus x squared. So that's number 2, 5 minus x squared. Number 3, you have the 3, that's a 3, square root of x plus 5 squared. Well, remember what that means when you have a factor, when you have two terms or binomial, if you want to think of this as binomial being squared, you can rewrite this as 3 square root of x plus 5 times itself. Oops, square root of x, this is supposed to be x right here, plus 5, right? All right, and then foiling this, now be careful, you have first times first. So remember you have 3 square root of x times 3 square root of x. Okay, so remember 3 times 3 is 9. Now this right here, see that those two factors square root of x times square root of x, you know the square root of x squared, which is x. So this becomes 9x. That's what this is. Okay, so that's going to be your first. Your outer, now again be careful, your outer you have 3 square root of x times 5, right? Well, 3 times 5 is 15, so it becomes 15 square root of x. So that's your outer. Positive times a positive is a positive, so we'll be adding that. 15 square root of x. Now, remember, whenever, just like we did when you talked about polynomials, whenever you square a binomial, the outer and the inner are exactly the same. So notice that 5 times 3 square root of x, if you cover all this other part out, 5 times 3 is 15, so you get 15 square root of x. All right, and then the last one is easy because that's just a positive 5 times a positive 5, which is 25. Combining like terms, if you look at this, the only terms you can combine, see this has square root of x and this term has square root of x. So these are the only two terms that you can combine. This is a 9x and this term is just a constant. So those are the only two like terms. So I get 9x. 15 and 15 is 30, so you get 30 square root of x and then plus 25. All right, so that's number 4. Okay, let's look at number 5. That was number 3, sorry. Let's look at number 4. So number 4, we have 2 square root of 6x minus the square root of y times 3 square root of 6x plus the square root of y. All right, so this is going to be a little messy. So let's just be careful when you do this. So again, you have 2 terms times 2 terms, so we can use the FOIL method. All right, now let's think about the first. So you have this times this. So write it out. You have 2 square root of 6x times 3 square root of 6x. Okay? So 2 times 3 is 6. The square root of 6x times the square root of 6x, most of you know that's just 6x. But if you didn't, you would say, well, that's going to be the square root of 6 times 6 is 36, x times x is x squared. But you know you can simplify the square root of 36x squared as the square root of 36 is 6, square root of x squared is x. And so this becomes 36x. So that's your first. So your first, notice that's 36x. Okay? The outer, again, be careful. The outer, I'm going to put that here. The outer, you have 2 square root of 6x, 2 square root of 6x times the square root of y. Well, remember when you multiply radicals and the indices are the same, the product property for radicals says I can multiply the radicands together. So it becomes the square root of 2, 6xy, just like this. So that's your outer, plus 2 square root of 6xy. The inner, if you look at the inner, you have, first of all, a negative times a positive is a negative, so we'll be subtracting. All right, let's go ahead and write that out. So when I write that out, I'm going to write that out here. So when I write that out, I have, remember we're looking at the inner now. So you have the square root of y times 3 square root of 6x. So by the product property for radicals, I know that the square root of y times the square root of 6x is going to become the square root of 6xy. So this becomes 3 square root of 6xy. So that's this, 3 square root of 6xy. And then a negative, so now your last, a negative times a positive is a negative. Now remember, the square root of y times the square root of y is the square root of y squared, which you all know is y. Okay, now, so you see, kind of messy, so you could have easily messed up, made an error, so just be careful. I want you to notice, though, that these terms right here, you have to recognize those are like terms, because this is square root of 6xy, and this is also square root of 6xy. Here you have a positive 2, you have a negative 3 of them. So together, that's a negative 1. So I get 36x minus the square root of 6xy, see that negative 1, minus y. And there's your answer. You can't combine anything else because all these are different terms. Okay? All right, and then number 5, look at number 5, you have the square root of 3x minus the square root of 5y, and that's being squared. So again, let's go ahead and write out what that means. So that means the square root of 3x minus the square root of 5y times itself. The square root of 3x minus the square root of 5y. And then you take the time and you FOIL this out. Okay, so let's discuss this. So look, first things first. So the square root of 3x times the square root of 3x, most of you know is 3x, right? Because the product property for radicals says that if the indices are the same, I can multiply the radicands. So that's the square root of 9x squared. Square root of 9 is 3. Square root of x squared is x. So my first is 3x. Let's talk about the outer. First of all, a positive. So here's your outer. Positive. So if you need to cover up some stuff, you cover up some stuff. Okay? So you're multiplying these two together. So a positive times a negative is a negative. So we'll be subtracting. You have the square root of 3x times the square root of 5y. According to the product property, I can multiply this. 3 times 5 is 15, so I get the square root of 15, and then x, y. And notice I cannot simplify this. The only perfect square that goes into 15 is 1. The exponent here is 1, that's less than the index. Exponent here 1, less than the index. So that's it. So it becomes minus square root of 15, x, y. Okay? Now let's talk about the inner now. So if you need to cover up the other portion, let's see. So if you have to cover up the other portion, then you cover up the other portion, the outside right here. So just cover that up. And so let's talk about the inner. A negative times a positive is a negative. And the same thing, you have the square root of 5y times the square root of 3x. This times this, which is the square root of 15 xy. So minus the square root of 15 xy. And you knew, remember you're squaring, you're squaring a factor with two terms. So you know, see how those factors are the same? So the outer and the inner better be the same. All right, now be careful with the last. So you have a negative times a negative is a positive, right? Okay. So you have the square root of 5y, that's right here, times the square root of 5y. Most of you know is 5y, right? Because 5 times 5 is 25, so it becomes the square root of 25. Y times y is y squared. And you know the square root of 25 is 5. Square root of y squared is y. So it becomes 5y. Combining like terms, the only terms you can combine are these two. Those are the only two. You have a negative 1 and a negative 1. So I have 3x minus 2. So it becomes two of these. Square root of 15xy plus 5y. And you cannot do anything else. You're done. All right, so that is it. So that's the key to topic 22. So that's the key to topic 22, Radicals Worksheet Extra 14.